How's it going, y'all? Got something a little different for you today. It's primary election season here in Moscow, and the Latah County Republicans recently hosted a candidate forum at the 1912 Center to give their primary candidates a chance to answer some questions and to interact with citizens. I sat down this past week with several of the local college Republicans for a discussion about the event's proceedings, the candidates, and the future of politics here in Idaho. I hope you enjoy. How's it going, y'all? This is Aiden Anderson with Moscow Report. I am here today at the 1912 Center with several of the young Republicans of the local Latah GOP, and we're talking about the recent primary candidate forum that took place this past Thursday. I don't imagine many of the viewers know who you guys are off the bat, so how about you go down the row and introduce yourselves, what you do, what your relation is to politics.
All right, I'm Lauren Young, and I am currently the Moscow 16 Precinct Officer for the Latah GOP. I'm also a finishing senior at the University of Idaho, and I will be graduating next week with my bachelor's in political science. I'm also on the campaign trail to be just continue on with my role, so you've probably seen my name around Moscow at least.
Hi, I'm Hayden Cassinelli. I am the College Republicans Vice President as of pretty recently. I'm a student over at University of Idaho studying secondary education with a focus in social sciences. I also do political content for some of my friends over on Rumble on the Ethan Allen channel. A little shameless plug there. But yeah, that's me.
I'm Ryan Trenkel. I'm a senior at University of Idaho. I will graduate in a week as well with Lauren, except I will be graduating with a bachelor's degree in forestry, minor in fire ecology and management. Currently, I am breaking away from federal work in the fire world, so to say, going from a rappel crew to now I'm going to do some more forest-related and industry work in terms of cruising and more large campaign fire support for engine boss, the typical heavy equipment work, and most of the natural resource consulting world is my overall goal for my overall career. And I'm also an alumni member of the College Republican group that Lauren has been president of and Hayden is VP of currently, so that's me.
Hi, I'm Reynolds, and I'm now the current College Republican president. I'm the secretary of the Latah GOP. I'm a junior in marketing at the U of I. I worked as a farmhand in the past years, and then, like I said, I'm secretary of GOP currently, but soon to be out of that and focusing on college Republicans.
So, the event itself. I want to start by talking about sort of just the setup, the logistics, the presentation. It took place here in the great room, a couple floors beneath us. What were your guys' thoughts on just sort of the initial setup, how everything went, logistics?
I think it went pretty well. I know there were cards for questions, and I know there wasn't really signage or much direction onto where people could find them. I don't know if anyone else got it, but I'm glad that each of the candidates had their own microphone, so they were utilizing the time well and not wasting time moving a microphone around, even though I know there was a hiccup at one point. But I thought it went pretty well, just setup-wise.
Yeah. I mean, tech issues are sort of to be expected because anything that can go wrong will go wrong with something like that. But I did think it seemed like it pretty much went with that. I haven't been to many of these in the past, so I don't know how typical this was of a gathering like this.
I know this forum, there's much more of a turnout than when the GOP had done the city council forum in the fall, but that was at Moscow High School in the auditorium, which I think it was a little bit better because there was more people and it was easier to see the candidates. I know we were all on just the same floor, so I don't know, we were up in the front, so I don't know about people in the back if they could see or hear well. But no, I think it went pretty well. What are your guys' thoughts on it?
I would say it went really well. One thing that when Ryan and I sat down, he was wondering where like the candidates who are running for something different and they aren't just in the senator seat or going for CA, we were wondering where they're at, so they got like a quick introduction, which I know they're not competing against anyone, so like they didn't necessarily need a spot, but at first we were kind of like, where they're at, where are they going, are they gonna get to speak to us or not, and then they did.
Yeah, I think overall it ran pretty efficient. They were able to even pump out a couple extra questions because they were extremely timely with how they had their itinerary set for this meeting, and it was pretty smooth. I think that's probably one of the smoothest meetings that I've ever seen the GOP accomplish, because I think they really put everything down. They really actually consolidated all their ideas and how they wanted it to flow, and I think it turned out really well.
Dan kept very good at timing things properly. I love Dan. He is a great person, but he does struggle with the fact of shutting down a room when a room is being talked to. And if something is very vocal, something's very strong opinions, he struggles to shut someone down when the time is up. So when that happens, he can't always shut it down immediately. So he kept a really good job at, like, you have this amount of time, you're gonna respect that time. And that was appreciated for those who came out, because everyone has time that is spent somewhere, and that needs to be respected. So it seemed like it was really respected in that meeting.
I think with just with the answering of the questions themselves, they kept a pretty tight timer on things. And I think there was only one question at any point where one of the speakers went substantially over, and not even to the point where someone had to intervene and say, you need to stop speaking, but more so they just took a moment to wrap up their phrase, which I don't know if that's uncommon or not, but it felt uncommonly well run on that front.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Hayden, do you have any?
No, I have nothing unique. I just ditto everyone else. It was ran really well. I have no complaints with how it was run. This is kind of touching on the next question, I know, but all the questions were very pertinent and relevant. So yeah, I don't think there was anything wrong.
Yeah. One thing I'll put out to our audience who may not have participated in this is the primary was focused on 5 main candidates, 2 for Idaho State Senate and 3 for Idaho State Representative. So for Senate, you have Dan Foreman and Robert Blair, and then for Representative, it's a race between Lori McCann, Colton Bennett, and David Dalby. So those are the people we're talking about. They're the people who were answering the questions primarily. We heard a little bit from folks like Brandon Mitchell and Richie Skiles as well, but like we just talked about, they're not actually competing in a primary. They're the only ones running, and so they win sort of by default. But just to keep that clear so we know that we're not talking about somebody who isn't on this list. But yeah, let's jump into the questions. Had an icebreaker question at the beginning, which I thought was, I mean, it's not the usual way you'd open up a meeting, but any thoughts on that?
I love that.
Yeah, I liked it too. It kind of it really made it more personable, because I mean, I don't exactly remember what the question was, but we got to step into the lives of our candidates and be like, oh yeah, this is just a little bit about them, not many people know.
The question was, when was the last time you did something for the first time?
Yes.
And Colton Bennett is a very good speaker in front of people, and he's very structured, which can be nice to some people, but for me personally, I like to see someone as a person and not this very grand speaker who is very structured. And I get annoyed at those who go while speaking all the time. But at the same time, I still want to hear him speak really. And with that question, I felt like I actually got to see who he was in his personal world, not as a political person who is trying to impress everyone in the room.
Yeah, I think their introductions were overall really well. There was a couple candidates that spoke out to me in their own ways. Foreman in particular was more looking in on himself and his political career rather than trying to break the ice to the room, pretty much. Because when he was talking about the last time he did something for the first time, it was like, I think it was when he was still in service for the military. So I was like, okay, you want to back up your background a little bit, and that's great, but it's a really long time to be thrown for a loop and be like, when was the last time you did something for the first time? And it's like, oh, that was decades ago, and you're like, oh, okay. So, I mean, he's set in his ways, which was really good to see in an anchored individual, but that was kind of a little standout to me. I think overall, starting with an icebreaker was a good way to open up, especially considering everyone was a little bit tense getting up there, because you're sitting up in the 1912 Center. You got probably 100 people in front of you, and you're on the spot pretty much. So it was good to have them open up and break the ice really quickly. So I thought it went really well.
I agree with that statement. I think the world of politics is somewhat has become mean-spirited, and so just to open it up with a silly story. Now, not all of them did open it up with a silly little story, and I think if there were two big winners from that question, it was Colton Bennett and Lori McCann, who made it about either something funny or something heartwarming that really just showed everyone, hey, like these are real people. They aren't just people that fight over voicemail or fight on local television. These are real people with real lives who really just mean well and want the best. So yeah. I think it was a great way to open it up.
And like to kind of add on to that, it kind of shows more of what they do for like the rest of the year when they're not in session. Because I know Lori has a cattle ranch and Colton has his background of working in the medical field and just how they've taken like what they do for a career and just applying it to their story of what's new things that they're finding. But Colton's story was definitely very entertaining.
All right, well, moving on to question 2, you have, and this is a paraphrase, I thought I got it as Dan was speaking it, but maybe I don't have it quite right. Role of the legislature is propose and create good legislation, or what they deem as good, and then to get it passed, and asking the candidates how they will go about doing that. Variety of answers here. Some of them a little bit more administrative, some of them a little bit more principially focused, if that's a good way to frame it, but yeah.
No, yeah, I think you, and you had mentioned this to me after the event, that it's clear to see who's done this before and who hasn't done this before, where you ask, what's good policy, and Lori McCann and Dan Foreman are able to articulate what good policy is because they've written policy, and the others obviously haven't done so yet. However, they still had great answers in regards to what they want to see gotten done. Obviously, they don't have the technical know-how on doing that yet, but I have no doubt that they will surely learn it.
I think they have their priorities in the right place, like you're talking about. Like, they may not have the experience that are writing a lot of technical legislation that is very intricate and complex, but I think that their intentions are in the right place where they're going for what they want as good legislation, seeing as to how legislation in the past has impacted the day-to-day lives of the actual citizens of District 6 and the state as a whole. So I think that the rift of experience to say is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it does speak volumes to the candidate.
I think when I was listening to their answers, I would have wished to have heard, and I might have missed it, maybe one of them mentioned, but when you're writing legislation and you're putting stuff down into a bill, sometimes you get lost in trying to clarify everything, and I know that can be a lot. But when you're trying to get bills passed and maybe they're a hot topic and you want people to understand what's going on, I think clarifying and being very structured in that bill and having your point very clearly across and touching on stuff that you don't want, touching on stuff that you clearly do want, and writing that down where others can understand it and there's not going to be a huge debate because they can read it and understand exactly what's going on would be huge. The amount of legislation that has been brought up that you sit there and you actually wonder what the real goal is with the bill, and I think that should be a little bit more focused on for some people, and I have yet to see it. I want to see it in the future.
I can definitely second what KaraLin was talking about because not this past session, but last year's session, there are a couple of bills that were like, we understand what you are writing about, but we don't actually understand what your end goal is. And I know we had written a resolution when we were both on student government at U of I to ask for clarification. And luckily we were able to talk to our legislators about it to understand it a little bit more. But yeah, definitely adding more clarifying points to legislation that is being written.
Yeah, it does seem in the recent state sessions, I can't recall any particular bill, but it seems like questions of clarity have constituted the majority of the debates regarding certain issues that people want to engage with or particular bills that they want to get passed. It's a lot of, what is this actually trying to accomplish? Can we make that clear? And then word it such that it actually accomplishes what you say it's supposed to accomplish, rather than provoking a number of other problems.
Yeah,
and making it to where someone else can't come in later and reform it into something that its intended purpose wasn't. So molding that into something else that it wasn't intended for, and I think that's why we really need to clarify what's going on in certain bills, to make sure that they're structured, they're understood, and that it can't be misunderstood and reformed to something else.
Yeah, because like this year we had 800 bills that were introduced. And a lot of them weren't exactly clear on what the intent was, and I know legislators were just wanting to get it out. I know there's a lot of personal bills because it's election season, but as a constituent and someone who just follows politics, I'd rather have more clear bills versus like quantity, so quality over quantity, and some of the legislation that's being written.
Yeah. And one can hope, is there, looking at the various answers that people gave, were there any that, for this question at least, that stood out to you as, you know what, I think if I were to say that this person answered the question the most effectively, how would you answer that?
I'd say it was probably Lori McCann, and that's just because she has the experience, especially in education and especially in agriculture, and so she put that forward. Hey, I have experience in education and agriculture. I've written good bills in those arenas, and for that reason, I think she definitely took that question.
I'd second that.
I'd absolutely agree. I mean, Lori has, most of the bills that Lori has written for agriculture and education, they don't come from just overall what people are saying. She takes it as personal experience and personal like impact of how this will impact small educators, college, university, small rural communities, larger cities, and as well as just overall how is this going to affect education as a whole for the board, for the state board, and even for the agricultural side. On the flip side, I think she has a little bit more of an economical understanding of how that's going to turn out, assuming you start putting a lot of complex conjecture and a lot of complex topics within legislation to where it could become a great tool, or it could become something that's going to come back and bite our entire industry within the state of Idaho. So I think she has a lot of really good context knowledge, and I think she really does exceed as a legislator when she's talking about more than just the one or two topics or just amongst the party platforms as well. I think she really does a fantastic job.
All right, well, after those two questions, we got the first of the audience questions, which, first off, let's talk about that process. So you had these cards that people were collecting. You were doing the card collecting for part of that, is that correct? Okay. How was that experience in terms of just going about? How did that work out? Did it work out all okay?
Somewhat. I walked in the room, and normally because I'm secretary, I'm writing down notes, and so I immediately walk in, I go to Dan, I go, am I doing anything tonight? Am I writing notes? What am I doing? Do you need anything? And he goes, you're collecting cards. I go, okay, what do you mean? And he goes, so people are gonna go in the back, and there's little cards, and they can write down their questions, and then halfway through, I'm gonna ask to go have them collected. Then we're gonna look at them, see if any of them like match up, kind of, and then we'll summarize them and give them to the candidates. And so the kind of process was kind of like thrown at me last minute. It was like 5 minutes before we started. So I was like, okay. And the first initial round, there really wasn't that many people that had cards. And so someone else had grabbed all the cards. And then the second round, someone actually walked up, handed a card to Lauren, and then eventually handed it to me. And so I got that card, and then with the second round, when I was asked to go pick up cards again, there was a few more people, but I really think the expectation was to have a lot of people giving out cards and a lot of people asking questions, and I just don't think there is as many as what we were expecting.
Yeah.
And so I think Dan wanted more people to speak out and ask their personal thoughts and questions, and there really just wasn't that. There was maybe 10 cards total. So,
and we also only had an hour to just have these questions, and I know the GOP had written some, wanted some from constituents, and then if like you didn't know where the card was when you walked in, you lost that chance.
Yeah.
I was right about to touch on that too. Like it's great to be able to have your candidates actually read the questions of the people they're representing, but in the hour time that they had slotted, if they were to answer every single write-in question and encourage everyone to write a question in, we would be there till the next morning. I mean, you had almost 100 people there. It's 100 questions, and each candidate gets a minute and a half-ish to answer 5 candidates. You're going to be there all night if everyone writes in a question. So I think the GOP pre-writing just some open-ended questions to really let the legislators represent how they're going to represent the district was beneficial. And I think it was almost a perfect mix of having enough community engagement to write these questions in, because the questions were not something a simple answer could answer. It was mostly very contextual to the candidate, where it really showed how much the candidate was going to do for the district and for the representative seat.
If I can pitch in there, and I know the GOP thought out questions the Tuesday beforehand, and which was my bad. I was really meant to be at that meeting and be involved in the questions, and that week kind of blew my mind, and I forgot it existed, and I missed it. So I didn't get to find out the questions till everyone else did, but there were set questions for that, and then there was the questions that people were giving us, and if there was 2 that were kind of similar, that's the one they kind of chose. They didn't just want to read everyone's question individually, because they're really trying to respect people's time.
Yeah.
And when they say an hour, they're really trying to keep it around an hour.
Yeah, that makes sense as just general policy anyway. You'll get a lot of questions on the same topic that all have some of the same trajectory, and I can see, the possibility that you'd feel disrespected if your question wasn't read verbatim, but also it's part of the nature of this kind of event. They're trying to be respectful to people's time, and so you get enough questions on the same topic, same ideas, it's like, okay, well, we can formulate this into a more general question that will make everybody happy as far as being able to address people and help the candidates to give answers that make sense,
Right.
as opposed to something that's really just talking to one specific constituent, which you can do that, but it seems like you would have time after the fact if you really, really wanted something particular answered.
Yeah.
Right, and when asking questions at any of these sort of events, there's 2 ways to do it. There's the orderly way, which is you have the questions sent in via cards, text messages, what have you, or there's the disorderly way where you give an audience member a microphone and they could ask something that doesn't make sense, that is ridiculous, that nobody except maybe just them cares about. The thing about sending in questions in an orderly manner is it does give the MC of the event the ability to filter out some of the, no offense, the dumber questions, and just kind of keep the event on track and maybe speak to things that people want to hear. I know a recent event here drew some criticism for having questions sent in, but I think it is a good way to keep things orderly and not have time wasted. Really, it is respectful of people's time to kind of have the MC lead the charge.
Yeah. Well spoken, Hayden. Well spoken.
What he said?
Yeah. Yes.
Yep.
Well, looking here, we got two audience questions, with the first one being all about property taxes, which is just, I hate to boil it down to this because it was a little bit more nuanced than this, but it's basically like, do you or do you not like property taxes? Which seems like, I don't know, anytime someone asks about taxes, it feels like a loaded question, but
I think they all said like varying degrees of no. I don't like. Frankly, I don't like property taxes. Honestly, if I can point at one person who gave like a practical solution, it was Colton Bennett with the homeowners exemption.
Yeah.
A lot of the others kind of just said, yeah, they suck. Let's get rid of them. But I didn't hear a lot of practical. Besides the homeowners exemption, which was really only brought up by Colton Bennett.
I'd say Robert Blair had kind of a nice take on it, because he said like Idaho is a three-legged stool pretty much. You have sales tax, you have property tax, and then there was income tax. That's basically how the state's going to work. So if you take away one, you're going to have to increase the other two. And Colton did all the math, which was absolutely right. He rounded out, if you were to dissolve all the taxes into just one big tax, it'd be 38% across the board. Doesn't matter what you're doing, doesn't matter who you are, 38%, that is what it is. No argument, which isn't really fair, because sales tax is the most fair tax ever, because it doesn't matter if you're in the top 1% or the lowest 1%, you will pay a sales tax. It's the flattest, easiest way to do it. Robert, I think, had a really good perspective into how to structure it a little bit better, but better into which demographic are you talking for, like upper class, upper middle class, lower class. It depends on who you're talking about, and if you affect the property tax rate, you're going to affect all but one demographic within that, like the perspective scale of like prosperity and how wealthy people are. I think it's gonna be really difficult, especially to tackle the problem, considering that if it is really a three-legged stool per se for the state, you can't really lose 30% of your income, like, and expect things to be okay. You're gonna have to find another source to fill that void. And I think that Robert might have some good ideas and perspectives, especially growing up in more agricultural districts that really do feel the impacts of a property tax, versus someone from, say, like Ada County that just has a subdivision where it's maybe 20 acres versus someone who's got 800 acres of farm ground. It's extremely different. So I think the perspective there and who you're impacting is going to be really detrimental to how you're going to address the property tax issue.
I think everyone's not a fan of taxes. I mean, this country was built by people who wanted to get away from taxes, and our taxes have skyrocketed. I mean, that we were upset 10 years ago about, tea. And that's why
7%, and that was losing people's minds.
and yeah, so they got upset over tea and rebelled, and reason why we are here today. And we get taxed on everything and everything, it seems. And so everyone wants to get rid of taxes, but also everyone knows that we have to have some form of taxes. And we're all going to be mad at them. I remember I get my paychecks every month in the summertime, and it's a nice paycheck that I'm proud of, and then I look at how much I could have had if taxes didn't exist, and I just realized how much better my bank account would be off, and how much happier I would be, and all those things. But I know that in the end we can't just make things disappear, and I know that the hoops that people have to go through to get things changed is a lot. And the reason why sometimes it doesn't feel like our legislators get a lot done, because they have to go through so many things. Even being on the student government at the university, you couldn't get anything done. I mean, you would start.
That is still a true statement.
Yeah, I mean, it was so hard to get anything done, and you would come up with this great idea, and then you'd go talk to people, and people would be like, that would take like 3 years. You're going to be graduated by the time this even is considered. Yeah. And so you get it started, but then you have to find someone to take your place and keep it going after you're gone. And that's hard to do anymore. There's a lot of hoops to be jumped through, and that's small government, big government, anywhere you're at, it's difficult. And I wish it was an easier process, but I don't think our property taxes are going anywhere anytime soon. Because there's a lot to look through.
A different perspective, because the four of us rent. We don't own any property because it's the market at the moment is a little outrageous.
I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it because my credit card is a 15% interest rate, and I don't even.
But we have a different perspective. Like most people in the GOP or who we interact with in politics, they have property. They have more assets than we do. We all have an apartment and still technically could be dependent of our parents, due to our age. So it's like we have a different mindset. And then I know really we only have interacted with sales tax and not property, but income tax. And that is what we are aware of at the moment. We haven't hit that new chapter of reaching the property tax level and how it impacts us yet. So I know we have a different perspective than most people, but we're definitely eager to learn all about the goods, bads, and uglies about it. But I mean, like a lot of our taxes, I know at least some of them go to our transportation department. They are working on many very large projects at the moment, especially south of Moscow. I don't know if you've driven down there recently. It is down to one lane.
But the subtle of disapproval.
That's a good thing our taxes go to, because that road needed work. It's not great, especially during the winter time. But I mean, there's definitely benefits to having taxes. Yeah. It's an argument that will never end. Yeah. And it just depends on who brings it up.
Well, property taxes do affect our rent because we're paying more because our landlords are having to pay more property taxes. Yeah. And I think we're all in agreement. tax is bad, but I was just thinking of this, and I'm going to paraphrase pretty heavily here, but I believe it's from the beginning of 1 Samuel, where God is basically saying to the Israelites, you don't want a king. You will cry out to mercy when he taxes you 10%. And we're sitting here, as Colton said, 38% of our income is taken, and somehow we're okay with it. You know, our ancestors protested over a 5% tax on tea, and yet here we are. So
Yeah. I have a friend who talks about the idea that when it comes to any sort of infrastructure changes that are major, like the concept of getting rid of an entire tax and replacing it with nothing, it's a question, or it can tend to be a question of how do you replace the foundation without destroying the building, where there's a lot of stuff we're sort of presupposing about how the system runs. And in order for a major change like that to take place, we have to examine those presuppositions and say, okay, well, what of these things do we want to live without? Or what of these things do we have to throw up our hands and say we can't do anything about it if it does in fact collapse? So for example, there's the roads conversation, all of the many water and sewer districts, park management. We're looking at a very complex system that I think taxes play into as a concept that people, you know, it directly impacts people's lives. I don't really know of anyone who's really a fan of them. But at the same time, how do you interact with them such that change is actually effected? And I think a couple of the candidates did make a point of saying, we're looking at an entire system overhaul if we want to do something like that, rather than this is one cog in a huge machine that we can remove and everything will be fine. It's nope, this whole thing has to get shifted over, otherwise you'll end up in dire straits. I think it was either Lori or Blair who mentioned the way other states have gone about it and not wanting to end up like them.
Lori.
Yeah, Lori was talking about looking at, I think it was,
She mentioned California and
Yeah.
how one of the systems they tried.
I was going to say California and
work.
Washington, how they both flopped or something, something along the lines, because I think it was looking at our neighbors across the border, Washington for their agricultural stuff, how much they're taxed for land, considering they're part of the Columbia Basin, which creates a huge amount of produce and wheat. And then you also have California that produces a ton of row crop agriculture as well. So I think that she looked at both and was kind of weighing back and forth between how they have made it somewhat work and how, if it's even transferable to Idaho, how we have such a different industry. So
I think the unfortunate, and I hate to be a bit of a doomer, a bit of a pessimist here, but I don't see it getting better in our lifetimes.
No.
Since the passage of the 16th Amendment, the government has gotten used to both federal and state, but this primarily goes out to the federal, who are taking the most of our money, if we're being honest. They've gotten so used to having their pockets lined with our hard work, and I think we're to the point to where, unless major governmental change happens, we are going to be paying continually more and more taxes for the rest of our life, which is really unfortunate, but just the way things are, unfortunately.
The American people will have to put their foot down if they want some change. And I
Yeah.
don't mean just a few people here and there. I mean, it will have to be a very high percentage of our population to put their foot down and tell the government that they want change and they want to see change, and they're going to have to make a move to create that change. And unless that's going to happen, it will stay the same. They will keep overspending. We will not have a balanced budget, and we will keep sending money to places that maybe we don't agree with. So the American people really need to step up. We need to say something. There has to be some sort of movement like we did, like our ancestors did so long ago, and make something change. Unless it's not going to happen in our lifetime, just like Hayden said.
I believe it is going to have to be an absolute overwhelming majority just to even make the smallest changes anymore, because it's with the entire political spectrum of the U.S. becoming more polar, where there's a very, very, very fine margin in the middle anymore. An overwhelming majority is the only way to probably get anything done anymore, which is sad to see, that there's no longer a moderate window to where you can work between and go, okay, you can't have all, but you can have some. So I absolutely agree. For the tax situation, an overwhelming majority is probably going to be the only real way to make an impactful change. On the tax code, at least. Let me sneak that in there. On the tax code.
Audience question number 2, question regarding the Idaho abortion law and the recent Supreme Court case that's being delineated on that. If I can just frame it, it seems like a number of the candidates use the question as an opportunity to talk about the issue of abortion in general. And a couple others used it to talk about Idaho's law in particular and how that pertains to issues going on at the state. Obviously, difficult topic for a lot of people, but here goes.
I think it's so awesome and based that we as a state are having to have our forums based on like what exceptions are tolerable, like life of the mother, rape, incest, maybe, yeah, we have to consider that, not like, is this permissible at all? I'm so happy that we've reached a point in this country that we as a state can choose for ourselves. Hey, we're gonna take our debate not to like, should we kill this infant or not, but more like, let's debate the intricacies and the nuances of this instead of just like, is this permissible or not? Like, it's so cool that that's not even a question anymore. And I think we've made great strides in the pro-life movement to have that even happen at a state level.
Yeah.
Kind of playing off Hayden's thing. So a lot of the candidates, they were all on like pro-life. Like, obviously we want this child to be here, we want it to live. And Hayden talked about the discussion on the nuances of it and deciding where we're at there as a state. And that question we got to hear whether the candidates are for moms or for babies or both, and trying to save what we can, when we can, how we can, or where we stand on rape and incest and where that candidate personally stands and how they would vote. And then you got to decide personally who you would like and who you agree with most. And listening to them, all of them kept very level heads. That was really nice to see, because it's a hard topic. There's moms that were in the crowd that have either lost a child or something has happened to them in the past where stuff is not fun to talk about. It's not fun to deal with, and especially when it's going into politics and in law. And so listening to the candidates and hearing their thoughts on it, hearing their perspective on it was really nice. Actually getting to hear what they would do with this and how they would go about it, and getting to decide personally, okay, I agree with this person, okay, I agree a little bit more with this person, and actually getting to make that personal decision for yourself.
Yeah, and it was really nice seeing it was a calm conversation on this highly controversial topic, because I think our state attorney general is currently in DC talking with the Supreme Court on this case. So I don't know the specifics about it, but it was, going off of what KaraLin is talking about. I personally think we should keep those exceptions in, because our state doesn't just have conservatives in it. We do have Democrats, and we have to be able to work with that other party to represent everyone in our state.
Or they can just leave.
Yeah, but that's kind of hard thing to do, Hayden. But no, I thought the conversation went pretty well, and I know not everyone agrees with my own personal opinion on it, but it was a beneficial conversation to be had where it didn't end in a screaming match. Yeah.
There's a lot to unpack in the topic. There is a lot, because all the candidates hit on most of the important parts. I'm going to talk about Lori specifically, who mentioned the fact that since the state is working alongside of their abortion bill and alongside some of their healthcare stuff, since it is restrictive of healthcare, it's influencing the amount of physicians that are willing to practice in the state. That, I can absolutely agree on, is a huge problem. If you do not have physicians, especially in the rural areas, you are going to have massive problems where you will no longer have an agricultural base of people actually committing to practicing agriculture, which is a huge issue considering the state is an agricultural state. There's a lot to unpack, and I'm holding my cards pretty close to my chest because I have a medical license that can be revoked for speaking out and saying very non-intellectual or very charged topics. I'm going to give all of the candidates extreme props for not turning it into a massive debate back and forth and this roundabout pissing contest, to keep it short. And I think overall, all the candidates have interesting takes on it, as well as good reason behind each of their personal takes, if that makes any sense. So,
You mentioned Lori's point about the doctors leaving the state.
Yeah.
I actually think that was a point where Lori was kind of dealt a pretty significant blow in the debate, because Colton rightly pointed out that there are doctors leaving, yes, but to assume the cause of that without reasonable research is irresponsible, but also wrong. He mentioned the fact that Sandpoint's maternity ward is the one that closed.
Yeah, Sandpoint has closed their maternity ward, as well as there's no labor and delivery, so the closest anyone from the border basically to Coeur d'Alene, they have to go to Coeur d'Alene or to Spokane.
Okay, so yeah, he mentioned I knew from you that Sandpoint had their maternity ward closed. Colton also mentioned that Colfax had their maternity ward closed and said this is a problem with doctors in rural areas, not a problem with doctors leaving because of abortion. And to assume the causation of that is, I think, irresponsible, and I would have to 100% agree with Colton and say that he made the right call on calling that out, just because it's necessary to understand what we're talking about in these things. And even if it was because of the abortion laws changing, that's understandable. When legislation's shaken out, it took us 50 years for states to get the right to make their own legislation on this back. It's no surprise to me that in the first, almost 2 years now, where we've had that right again, that we're still shaking things out and there's still some uncertainty in the air. And it'll take some time before there is certainty. So it could very well be a probable cause that's why maternity wards are closing, but it isn't necessarily the cause. And I think it's irresponsible to say that it was, and so I think Colton was definitely the winner because of that.
I wouldn't say it's necessarily just all about Lori speaking out and the fact that there are doctors leaving the state of Idaho. I think she's boiling it down. This is my own personal perspective. I think when she's boiling it down to the state restricting scope of practice, it's an issue. That is basically the takeaway from a medical provider. If the state is going to take away some of your scope of practice to make your job more difficult because you can now do less, I think that's the correlation that is being talked about, not necessarily all being wrapped up to just abortion. It could be wrapped up to a whole slew of other things. It could be wrapped up into how the state is handling insurance handlings for their patients,
right,
and the institutions itself. It could be institutional based. It could be package based for like whatever benefits the doctors have that are working in the state and what incentives they give, as well as incentives for the state to even want to educate doctors in the state for them to work here. So I think it's a little bit too complex to wrap it up into a minute and 30-second answer as a blow to the debate. I think she's just making the correlation that if the state ties your hands behind your back to do less, you're less inclined to work there, is just the blanket statement from a provider and understanding.
Just to add on to this, I'm from North Idaho originally. I have family who lives in Bonners Ferry, and they almost had to drive down to Coeur d'Alene when my cousins were born. Also, just women's health in our state or just in general, is kind of a touchy topic because there's a lot more to unpack. And yes, you can't just give a full-blown opinion in a minute and a half. I know we've been probably talking about this for 10 minutes at this point, so it's just different. They didn't talk about some of the things that I wanted to hear about them talk about, especially in this discussion, because I know there's also been discussion about what does birth control do? How do we regulate that? Because I know there's more deeper issues, but I think all in all, if there could have been more time to talk about it, I think we would have gotten some more substantial information from our candidates, as well as kind of what plans they have if they were to be elected on what they would do for this issue that many of us ask questions about.
I think that the candidates did really well in answering the question, and I think what we have in law right now on rape and incest and some of that stuff and the different requirements for different circumstances. I personally think that is proper, and those who don't think that it is and think that that child can go up for adoption, I personally think, which Hayden and I kind of slightly touched on this a little bit this morning, we discussed college Republicans earlier today, and we talked about the give and take of things. And Dan Foreman, he's very strong opinioned, and he says exactly what he's going to do, and he says it very bluntly. And
Which I think we can all appreciate
I do.
as he is an
100%.
elected official.
Yeah, I appreciate that greatly, and I don't have to agree with him, but he says things very strongly, and he votes no on things. And Lori has gotten a bunch of bills passed, which is great, but you can't be a people pleaser all the time, but you also can't say no 100% of the time also. And so there's a give and take with politics, and the way it is right now, even though you may not agree that if a woman is raped and is now pregnant, that maybe she should wait out the birth and give that child to an adoption agency, maybe. But the way it sits right now, it's a give and a take for all people, and for our more moderate right people and our very far right people, and even our Democrats. The way it sits right now, it's better than if everything was banned entirely or everything was welcomed entirely. So it's kind of in the middle area where everyone is not overly happy, but decently okay.
And a lot of people think politics is just black and white, but there's a lot of gray issues, and it's comes down to an individual person, whether it's moral for them or,
And you can't make that necessarily law.
exactly.
And life is entirely give and take, so it just reinforces the point. This is a very great topic where there needs to be give and take if you're going to write a perfect bill or law or legislation regarding the entire topic. There's got to be give and take. So I think that's something that the legislators probably already know, and I think they're trying to just find the best give for the take that they're getting.
Moving on now to the final question of the evening of the forum, and that was a question about engaging with constituents. What do you think of the responses that were given there?
I don't know. It's kind of like across the board. I know from like our own personal experiences when we had Representative Mitchell and Representative McCann, they both came to College Republicans in November, I believe, and they've come a couple times. Sometimes it's a lot harder to get in contact with Senator Foreman. And then I really haven't interacted much with Colton Bennett or David Dalby or Robert Blair to really say how well they interact. I don't know. The only interactions, I haven't had great interactions with some of them. Hence the voicemail that I received earlier today. But
I would say with Lori McCann and Brandon Mitchell, because they've shown up to College Republicans and we've gotten to talk with them personally, we have a different perspective with those two. But also, at the same time, we had a legislative ambassador trip with the university that we got to attend. And first, them to look at you and remember who you are and shake your hand and say, hey, how are you doing? That's nice.
Yeah, or even remember some of the things that you're working on. They always ask us about how school's going, and they've gotten much more personal with us. And like we can, for me at least, I've gotten to know them pretty well over the last couple of years. I can just text them if I have a question, and they're really pretty good about responding.
Robert Blair, I spoke to him after the open forum, and he goes, "Oh, I'll have my trailer down here tomorrow. Like you can stop by."
I saw it. It is out there, right on 95 and 8.
Yeah, he's like, "Stop by. I'm gonna grill some food. Like if you have some topics you want to discuss, if you have some questions, come ask me. I'm just grilling food. Like you can come stop by anytime." And although like I did give him a call, and we hadn't seen his trailer out there yet, so I'm guessing it got moved out after.
I think it was moved this morning.
It is out there now.
I think we're gonna still go stop by because I mean that offer was extended, and that's pretty nice of him to do that for us, because I wanted to speak with him a little bit more personally, and I don't know about Colton or Dalby. I've spoken with both of them personally. Colton, every time he walks in the room, if he knows you, he comes and shakes your hand, and he says hello and says how how are you? And that's nice. That's obviously very personal. Being able to see them and then remember you and say hi to them is huge. And for them to not think they're up on a high horse and that they own the room because they're cool, because they go to Boise, is nice. They actually come and say hi. They're real people, and everyone needs to realize that and recognize that. And I think for the most part, that is how it goes, but still being able to see them only a few times and them ask how things are is a cool feature.
I know the last couple times we've tried to contact Senator Foreman, he just doesn't exactly want to do much with our age group, and that's widely known, which is like, it's unfortunate because he has a lot of knowledge that I like to pick his brain on, because he has such a different perspective and way to do things than our current elected officials, and just kind of wanting to know more of the reasons about it, or the reason why he doesn't always like interacting with our age demographic. And because like District 6 has a college campus, so we have 3 people representing. Elsie's on the line, unfortunately. But like there's a higher education institution, and I know Senator Foreman's not exactly pro higher ed like Representative Mitchell or Representative McCann are, but he'd still be a fun person to talk to. I know he just doesn't always interact well with constituents. I know he does a lot of radio appearances.
He's very honest, and we mentioned this earlier, that we all really respect that here, that he's blunt, he's honest. He will say what he thinks. We all appreciate that. And we wish we had more candidates like that, and that doesn't come around a lot. So we would, like Lauren said, we would like to sit down and talk with him.
I think, speaking on Foreman specifically, I think honestly the reason why that he's been reelected so many times is because the representatives he works with, they already know where his line in the sand is, and they can work with it because he's so blunt and he's so upfront about where he stands on things, and his personal rapport and his political history speaks for it. But just to tack on to what KaraLin and Lauren were talking about, his demographic he talks to is legislators and his constituents in his office for Senate and state. It's not necessarily the college active groups on campus that are politically inclined. It's not exactly the coalitions between ranchers, farmers, business owners, HOAs, property management groups, the latter of the rest of the non-political world, which I think it's not detrimental. He's been doing politics for the last 20 years. I think he knows what he's doing for the most part, but I think he's playing to his absolute strengths to try and ensure that he's going to succeed, which I think I would really like to see him include more to just his absolute strengths to gain a higher populace, so he can actually get a little more context, especially for the younger demographic.
I think if there's one answer during that question that stood out to me, because most of them were kind of the same. They were like, we go to the local events, we come to, the GOP Central Committee meetings whenever we're here. I think if there was one answer that did stand out to me, it was Colton's, talking about how he had gone out to the more rural towns in our county and in our district, and chatting with folks who had said that they hadn't had their door knocked on by a politician in 30 years. So I think that was a really unique answer, and as a result, he really stood out to me on that question.
I think that speaks volume to just being a younger candidate, though, with less stuff to manage once you get older. If you have like a property, or if you have your own assets to manage, or everything else. With Colton being so young, I think he doesn't have because Colton mentioned he also rents as an individual. He doesn't have property that he owns in Latah County, or not Latah County, but District 6 as a whole. I think he's in a very unique spot where he has the availability, since he does not have properties to upkeep like most of the folks that own property here in District 6 are all multi-property owners, where he has the time to be able to go out and really campaign more, which I think is helping him campaign a lot, considering that he has the time to be able to go out to Peck and Kuski and all the smaller rural communities that haven't had a politician knock on their door in 30 years, which I think is interesting to see out of such a young candidate.
Have such a wide slate of candidates this year, and I know they all have different strengths and weaknesses, which it kind of makes it hard to be like, who do I want to actually support, because they all offer so much, but then they have their weaknesses. But I'm like, everyone has weaknesses, but I don't know. all of them definitely play to their strengths, which has been really neat to see. And I think this is like the most, not wildest race I have ever experienced, but it's definitely going to be the most hot topic race. Just because we have so many individuals running for the same positions, because they all have such a lot of things to offer our district and just their constituents at this point.
With this question, I would say Robert Blair personally stood out to me, visiting the VFW and going to breakfast with certain people. And I went and found his Instagram not too long after this forum, and went and looked through some of this stuff. And of course, they're campaigning like, yes, they're gonna go do all this stuff, but he wasn't sitting there in a suit and tie and being very structured. And I mean, he was sitting there being a great normal person, just casual clothes. I mean, he looked nice, he looked like a candidate, but he just wasn't dolled to a T. He had a button down and jeans on, and he was shaking people's hands and saying hi to them. I come from a really small town, and we have a very high colonel that lives near us, and he knows us personally, and he's normal. Everyone in our small town is like, oh my gosh, it's General Colonel Reese, and we're like, yeah, he's our neighbor. What do you mean? Like, I mean, he doesn't want to be the room crowded with people and then them part ways and let him walk down this grand hallway down the red carpet. That's not what he wants. And I feel like Robert Blair is the same way. I mean, these are real people. They are just wanting to do something for their state and support their people and speak for them. And I really think that's every candidate's goal. But seeing Robert Blair go out to the VFW and be a part of these certain groups is a huge thing. And door knocking is great, but you only can hit so many people in an amount of day, and that's a lot of time, it's a lot of money, and I'm really glad Colton has that ability to, but I know that would be exhausting if I was to run.
Also, like, when was the last time someone opened their door when it was knocked on? Because, like, I don't know about you guys, but my parents told me if you're home, you're not expecting anyone, and there's a knock on your door, go hide.
As a door-to-door salesman, it was about a third of all doors.
That's
it'd be really discouraging.
That's how I grew up. So it's just
I'm sorry, what?
Typically, I'm like,
to go hide.
Also,
like that
so
is
many,
the
like,
most.
people just come in. Like, I'm in a different area, but like,
I think most of the candidates are out door knocking today, actually.
Yeah.
I believe they all are starting. I think it was like 9 this morning where they've been door knocking, I think.
Yeah,
but
I don't know.
They just can't compete with the young Zoomer energy of Colton. Actually, is he a Zoomer? He might be a millennial. I'm not sure.
No, he's
I don't
he's
know.
Either early Zoomer or late millennial.
I don't know.
Early
Doesn't
He's the same
He's
age
my
as
age.
He has the Zoomer
He's
energy.
2000, so he's Gen Z with all of us.
He's Gen Z.
That's what I
Well,
thought.
yeah.
My
he's
suspicions are confirmed.
Oh, yeah. Your suspicions are confirmed. He is in fact 23 or 24.
He's got the Zoomer energy.
Door knocking conversation aside, I do think that, engagement, like personability is personal. So a lot of what makes it difficult is trying to figure out methods of connecting with people that reach not only audiences, there's all the campaign strategizing around how can I reach the audiences that most matter to me so that I can get the number of votes that I need to get elected, that I've interacted with the right people. That's why, at the national level, you have caucuses, like the major caucuses in certain states as opposed to other states, because that's where this critical mass of conversation takes place. It's why certain people campaign when they're going on the national trail. They'll visit some states and then not so much others. And so there's a lot of different strategies you can take there, but it really strikes me, at least, as a give and take conversation. Like, you're going to choose a method that works well for you, and that's going to have some upsides and downsides with who you're actually able to interact with meaningfully and quite possibly convince to vote for you. It seems like you get kind of a wide variety of methods, though, portrayed in this particular forum. Everything from Colton's door knocking to all of the consistent engagement that the incumbents have through their email chains and supply systems, that sort of thing. Well, with the questions on the forum questions wrapped up, I want to ask a couple general ones just about the forum and then looking forward to how politics in Idaho continue to progress. I'm going to start particularly with, I'll just throw this out there. Any election predictions? Not necessarily who you'd vote for, but any election predictions?
I mean, I think the safe bet is always that the incumbents take it.
Yeah.
It's probably, it's a toss-up.
Yeah.
Because I think Dan Foreman will take it with no questions.
Yeah.
I think the recent vote of no confidence proceedings with Representative McCann might have some effect on that, but the knowledgeability of I don't think many local Republicans were actually involved with that process. I think it was a very select few.
Yeah.
So most people see incumbent and they check the box. Some people are critical of that, but it's for good reason. As we learned, they know what they're talking about. So I think I do think Dan Foreman will take it. Maybe not no questions, but I think he'll take it by a somewhat considerable margin. I think it'd be a closer toss-up in the representative race. If I were to say anything, it'll probably be Representative McCann first, with Colton coming up second, and I think it might be close. So.
Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be a very close race, because I know the GOP has definitely been focusing on winning elections. That has kind of been one of the new movements of this, the new strategized GOP coming from our state party. And like, all honesty, Colton might be able to pull off the primary, but I don't know if he'll be able to pull off the November election, because Lori has more of those moderate votes under her. And I'm not positive. I'm not sure who's running on the left. But
I believe the Democrats, so the two representatives that they've put forward are Kathy Dawes and Trish Carter Goodhart. I think I'm saying that correct. I think Brandon Mitchell will be facing Kathy Dawes. So whoever wins the primary in May, they'll be facing Trish Carter Goodhart. And I don't know exactly what her level of popularity is.
I am
no
not
idea.
too familiar on it, so I'm not going to speak much to
We
it.
don't pay attention to that.
Yeah.
But if the GOP wants to win elections, I believe that our incumbents will be our best chance to keeping District 6 red.
I think particularly for this election, the incumbents will most definitely try and take the lead here and try and succeed. But for the future elections, I think the GOP really needs to open their eyes to realize that there is a lot of younger demographic that is coming of voting age that they should not ignore or just put to the side anymore, because if you look at numbers, there is way more sub 50-year-olds than there are over 50-year-olds anymore now in Latah, or not just Latah, but in District 6.
And then Mayor Becky has made the argument that if college students had the drive, they could take over Moscow.
Yeah.
Because there's enough of us. And I believe some people forget that in our parties, that we are also able to vote now, and we have an opinion that might differ.
Well, I think their demographics will be skewed, especially for my story, since I moved to Moscow, not this last September, but the September before, and I didn't move my residency until this year when I wrapped up my education. So I was never a voting member until this year for the state. That's where I think that they're not too concerned with the college vote, because they realize most people that are coming up here for college are not coming up and staying in Moscow for an extended period after their education is finished. So I think that's where they're not entirely focused, but the group that is staying, they really need to grab the attention of, and they really need to attempt to grab the vote there, because there's a considerable amount of people that come up here and they really like the atmosphere and they love the environment up here and they stay. So I think they really need to grab that younger vote, even if it is freshly graduated or about to graduate or going on for a higher education past a bachelor's degree. And I think if the GOP wants to really succeed, they need to open their eyes and they need to get on campus a little bit more to engage a little bit more with the younger demographic that is going to be staying in Moscow.
Which actually, that's a good segue into, I won't say it's my last question, but close to my last, to kind of sum it up, because I guess to that end, because some of you are graduating, some of you are wrapping up college here, are your plans long-term here in Moscow or here in Idaho, or are you looking elsewhere? Are you looking are you part of the group that's going to be out in a couple of years, or are you part of the group that's no more invested in this town, in this state? I think it'll vary, but...
So I want to stay in Idaho. I may not stay necessarily in Moscow itself, but I like Idaho politics. I like their way of running things, and I may not be in favor of every single thing, but I know that this is the kind of place I'd rather live than Washington, where they take funds out of your paychecks and put it into a retirement fund, but if you move, they get to keep your money. And that it doesn't go with you, and you've lost how many dollars, thousands of dollars towards that fund. So I like Idaho politics. I may not be in Moscow forever, but I'm a part of the GOP because I want to be informed. I'm young. I'm still learning things. I want to know who's leading Idaho. I want to know what they're about, who their connections are. I want to know really where their roots lay and how they want to go about things. If this is going to be my state long term, I want to know who's there, and I want to know now, and I want to get involved now. And I may not be in agreement with everything, but it's important to me, even if I can't make a change really fast. But if I can be there, if I can be a voice for younger Republicans who are coming in who may different from our older Republicans, I want to be there, I want to be involved, and I want to be in Idaho.
Mm-hmm. And sort of with that idea in mind, if you could pick one, because obviously you're varying degrees of involved in the local party and to an extent the state party because you're paying attention to the political goings-on here. Is there anything looking at yourselves as sort of like looking to the future, the next 5 years, 10 years, what have you, is there any particular issue, concept, structure, party platform ideal that you would want to particularly focus on, whether that's to, I really want to take this point home, I want to continue to promote this, I want this to be a thing that our state accomplishes in the next 10 years, or maybe it's not that, maybe it's something like, hey, this part of the platform shouldn't be there, and I would really like to hammer home that we do something else instead.
I mean, I want to stay in Idaho. I'm born and raised here, but that's all in God's plan at this point. But if I were to talk on a specific party issue, just listening to the young voters, they're our future. I know last summer they took away the young Republican and college Republican vote from our executive committee, and I'm not 100% sure what the entire story behind it was. I wasn't at that meeting, but it wasn't, I know it didn't go down the best way it could have, because that is a very large demographic. We're talking about the ages from 18 to 40, just about, which is like half of our party. And it kind of what showed us, at least as young voters, that our state party doesn't exactly care what our voices are, because they are a lot different. I'm personally more moderate than some of the other people in our local party, which I know can ruffle some feathers about some of the stances that I have, but I'm just starting out in my career. I am still figuring out how the world works away from my parents, what my personal views are on certain hot topic issues or just different issues in general that I have yet to experience because of where I am at in my stage of life. But definitely trying to represent those young voices, because not saying that we're the most impressionable, but sometimes we have crazy ideas, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't work, but you're not going to know unless you try them out, which is why it's one of my points that I'm running for my precinct position, is focusing on those younger voices, because most of my precinct is college-age students, and they deserve a voice as well.
I don't think they can be ignored, and I don't think that our vote should have been cast away. I think that if you are someone who's older and is looking at the way things are going and you're not happy about it, don't cut them off. They still exist. Mm-hmm. They are still people. They are still growing up and going to be voting or hoping to be voting. Why not grab a hold of them And yes, we might be impressionable, or maybe we're not because we're stubborn, who knows. But be a leader, be a guide to those. Dan Schoenberg, I like him a lot. I mentioned this before already. And I trust him. I trust what he says. And when I have questions about stuff, I like to go to him and get his thoughts and opinions. Now, I'm not saying that I just latch onto him and I'm like, yes, this is Dan's thoughts. These are my thoughts. But I do like his perspective. And I have friends that are even on the Democratic side, and I still ask them questions too. And I go, what's your thoughts? And I normally don't agree with them, but I like to hear their thoughts. I like to see where their perspective lays. And I think that's important, is to talk with people who aren't just solely Republican, but to talk with those who are maybe middle or Democratic, so you can have a perspective on both sides and be well-rounded.
And going off of your comments about Dan Schoenberg, he really took college Republicans under his wing when I first started my term as presidency 2 years ago, and just allowing us to have an experience of having a seat at the table, talking about these important issues that impact our lives as well, and just getting us into the realm of the political world at such a young age, which has been very beneficial for, I know, at least me. I don't know about your guys' own opinions on it, but.
I mean, I have my own opinions. Just like a final wrap up and a thought to the GOP is, I'm going to pay a little homage to my old 5th grade teacher, Mr. McFetridge. Set the example, do not be the example. If the GOP sets the example that they prioritize the young vote and they want to bring up a positive mentorship and stewardship of the young ideas, to bring forward the fact that yes, we may be outspoken, yes, we might have some radical ideas, but you channel those in a positive manner and set a good example, you will thrive, and the party will grow much faster and be much more accepted by the young demographic than it ever will in any other circumstance. So set the example, don't be the example.
I'll answer both of your questions. I'm staying here. Not necessarily in Moscow, but in Idaho, 100%. Most of my family is from Treasure Valley, so and I want to start having children sooner rather than later, and I want them to grow up near their grandparents and great grandparents as well. So we might be moving back down for that, my wife and I. One thing that about the platform that I think we need to be pushing, and I think it's awesome that it's included. And part of the reason might be the influence of Moscow. We're witnessing, especially in Moscow here, and my panelists are probably going to disagree with me on this one, because I know they do disagree with me. But we're witnessing in Moscow the start of a real substantive Christian nationalist movement. And I think we need to keep up the steam on that, and we need to see more tenets of the faith and of Christian government in our platform and in the party at large. I think we have a pretty good grasp on that here in Idaho. We just need to keep pushing.
I can agree with that on that point.
Well, anything else? Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Not at the moment.
I don't have any.
No?
Are you going to ask us who we're voting for?
I mean, he kind of did.
I was
Bit
gonna
of
put
voter disclosure,
I
it's
feel
okay.
like he can judge that based
Our-
on our comments.
Our
Probably.
game-winning predictions? Or I guess we already had that.
Yeah, we
but,
had that.
I can do, what is it, like Sherlock in the BBC series, where he just like analyzes all your facial features and says, yep, voting for this guy. Anyway, I'll end this up for our audience. This has been a panel discussion with the college Republicans and hopefully a precinct committee man, if things go according to
In
plan.
the position, but running for re-election.
All right, incumbent precinct committeeman then. Thank you so much for joining us, and a special shout out to Nathan Tupper. He wasn't able to make this event proper, but he helped to get it organized. He's a lot of why this has taken on the form that it has today. Very grateful for him and looking forward to connecting with him after the fact. I'm Aiden Anderson. This has been a panel discussion with Lauren Young, Hayden Cassinelli, Ryan Trenkel, and KaraLin Reynolds. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you guys for being a part of this.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having us.
Yeah.
And that was my conversation with the college Republicans. Once again, big shout out to everyone involved, and especially to the 1912 Center and to Nathan Tupper for helping put this event together. The primary election is May 21st, but early voting should be open leading up to the big day itself, so if you're registered to vote and signed up with any of Idaho's political parties, please consider participating in this year's primary election. As always, we'll have the relevant links posted with this video, and if you have any questions, please reach out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.